Rabbi Karsh, why is there reluctance on the part of Orthodox rabbis to speak on panels with the non-Orthodox? How has this affected you? And what relationship has this had, what impact, has this had on the relationship between the various movements?
First of all, I do not apologize for being an Orthodox rabbi. I just want to make that clear. Although for some reason it does sound like that's a problem. I'm very proud of being an Orthodox rabbi. And I'm very grateful to be here. I'm very grateful to participate in this kind of a discussion and to do it with the people that are gathered here. And I do it with the following understanding, and that is that ultimately this is about relationships, and relationships are messy. Relationships are what matters. Relationships are what matters most in our lives. Our happiness chiefly derives from the success of our relationships, and they are also, hopefully, the area of our life where we put the most effort. And a big part of the reason we put a lot of effort into them is because they are not easy, and they are not predictable, and feelings get hurt, and it can take a long time to help soothe the effects of hurt feelings. If I'm successful, if we're successful tonight, feelings will be hurt. That's what's going to happen. But it's part of a dialogue, and if any of you walk away from this hurt by anything that I've said and don't speak to me afterwards and try to follow up and try to work this thing through, then it will be a tragedy. This is the beginning of a discussion. And it's very important that we understand that. It's for this reason that I'm here. Because typically what could happen on a panel like this is that you could get people very concerned about what's being said and very concerned about how it's being perceived, and then you get a lot of fluff. You don't get genuine discussion. Mm-hmm. And to me that's a waste of time and waste of an important opportunity. So I'm probably going to say something that's going to offend you. Probably everybody here, including my other panelists. So, but I do that again with this desire to begin a relationship and my willingness to be criticized afterwards, as I am often by my wife and other people, about the thing, and to learn from everybody here as well. So with that being said, I'm going to share with you three events that formulated my understanding of this issue. Again, the issue is the participation of Orthodox rabbis on panels with conservative and Reform rabbis. The truth is it's a broader issue. It also involves being involved in organizations, rabbinic organizations. It also involves being on boards and in debates and things like that. I'm going to talk about things that happened to me personally because I'm not a scholar. This, by now, has become an issue of scholarship. This goes back several decades. There were all sorts of proclamations and learned responsa and things of that nature that have helped to form what is the historical narrative of this subject, and I am not a scholar of that, but I am a person who has been very affected by the outcome of that discussion. And it's very possible that the experiences that I had were not the intention of the people that were initially writing responsa or making proclamations, but my experience, I believe, is a true indicator of what is out there. So I'm going to mention three, and they're not exactly the same. They touch on slightly different issues. The first one is when I was in high school, I went to Brisk Yeshiva here in Chicago in West Riders Park, and my Rosh Yeshiva was Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik. Rav Aaron Soloveitchik was an incredible scholar. He was a person of international reputation. In Chicago, he was his For some reason in Chicago, he was least respected around the world. When I lived in Israel and Rav Soloveitchik traveled to Israel, it was front page news when he came to Israel. We were in high school, and Shlomo Carlebach came to perform a concert, and he performed a concert in, I think it was Ner Tamid, in it was a conservative synagogue in West Riders Park. And many of us wanted to go hear Shlomo Carlebach's concert, but Rav Aaron Soloveitchik did not want us to go hear it because according to Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, and this was an opinion that was shared by his brother and probably every noted Orthodox rabbi at that time, it was forbidden to enter a conservative synagogue. This goes back, like I said, to issues, if you want to research it, this goes back to issues, this is not a private matter, these are public matters, they involve public declarations and letters and responsa. And so it was on a Saturday night, and he usually spoke at Shalosh Shudas time, which is just before Shabbos ends. And that night he spoke for maybe an hour and a half longer. So we could not attend that concert. And this was indicative, this was something that was a matter-of-fact kind of affair. We knew if we went, we were breaking rules. We didn't understand the depths of the theological differences between the two things we're bantered about. I've tried to research specifically what the issues were that were considered, and it was at the time, and I'm sure it still is. The theology, part of the theology of the conservative movement is considered a heretical doctrine according to Orthodoxy, and we were not meant to give any kind of validity by being present to what is a heretical doctrine. It may not just be the ideas, it might also be practices, and there are some that may come to mind that, that were matters of great contention, like driving on Shabbos and things like that. But I don't know exactly what they were, and that's matters of scholarship. I can just tell you what we were told and the way it was presented at that time, that it was forbidden to enter a conservative or reform synagogue, because by entering a conservative reform synagogue, I would give the appearance that we are possibly praying or supporting the theology of a conservative reform synagogue, and that would somehow show validity to what otherwise is a heretical position. About 10 years ago, when I moved up to Northbrook to start the Torah Learning Center of Northbrook, I was working for the Chicago Community Kollel. The Chicago Community Kollel is a wonderful institution in West Riders Park, and I was very proud that I worked for them for 11 years. And besides the fact that I was their outreach director, they were also mentors to me in many regards. And one of the areas that I found them to be most wonderful mentors is their first of all, stressing adherence to halacha in the finest detail, but also stressing the adherence to halacha in the finest detail, which meant that they were concerned, they were truly just concerned about what the halacha said. They were not as concerned about the social, what some people might be saying about what you were doing. So, for instance,
I'm sorry, Rabbi Karsh.
Now you see this will not be a waste. Say you saw him. All right. He's the main reason I came. Yeah, so what were we talking about? Oh yeah, so the call. Anyway, so which meant that if they felt that something was the right thing to do, they encouraged me to do it, even if there would be some kind of reaction to it afterwards. So I was introduced to Rabbi Weinberg of Beth Israel on Dempster, and through somebody who was working at TLC at the time. And we developed a friendship at that time, and we talked about doing something together, that he would get together some members of his congregation, and I would bring some members, some people perhaps from West Riders Park or Skokie, and we would study together, and with no agenda. That, it's just to have members of a Reformed congregation studying together with Orthodox Jews, together, just to get to talk to each other, just to get to whatever. And so we did this maybe 3 times. The first time was just study. There was not going to even be really discussion, just to get to know each other, and there was text, and we studied together. The second time, the second or third time, I don't remember, we also had discussion afterwards. And in the discussion, people were encouraged to talk from the heart. So one of the women from Beth Israel had talked about how hurt she was because there were women, Orthodox women, who did not want their kids to play in her house. They didn't want kids to play in her house because they didn't apparently trust that she would feed them kosher or keep whatever restrictions, Orthodox restrictions were there. And she voiced this to the Orthodox women that were there, that how hurt she was, because why would she want to do something, you know, that they, contrary to their wishes? Why would you assume that? Why don't you, you know, and that lack of trust was just, was very, very hurtful to her. So after the discussion, a woman from the Orthodox side of it called me up and told me she couldn't sleep that night because she realized she's one of those women. And so it was that kind of discussion that was going on, which is absolutely necessary discussion between people, where you can realize that maybe there are issues where we differ, but there are other issues that are just inexcusable and that need to be confronted. So that kind of thing happened, and it was able to happen because it wasn't a public drama. If this thing had become a public issue, then there would have been all sorts of concern about what is going on. And again, even though it technically is not a panel, or this or that, there could be concern about whether or not this moves in the direction of challenging fundamentals of principle of the Orthodox community and validating principles that are not. It clearly wasn't that, but it had to happen in a way that couldn't spoil it. And that was the issue that came up with Bobby as well. When Bobby asked me, could there be discussion or dialogue, I have that discussion and dialogue all the time. I study with Reform conservative rabbis. I have that kind of private discussion all the time. But if it comes to a public discussion and the people who I'm going to call the minders, the ones who are paying attention to that line between what is Orthodox and what is not, suddenly are awakened to a potential risk, then it creates pressures that are just bigger than whatever benefit could come. It becomes the subject instead of whatever else was supposed to happen. All right, so now is the third event that happened, and this is an event. I'm going to share this with you. I personally am still working this through. I'm sharing this with you because I think it illustrates how profound an issue this can be for Orthodox rabbis who are reaching out and trying to have the dialogue. But also, it explains some of the issue. These are real issues. These are not just issues for the rabbis. These are real issues for the Orthodox community as well. Several years ago, I was teaching a class at Ezra Habonim. Ezra Habonim is a traditional synagogue, but in the minds of the Orthodox leadership that pays attention to these kinds of things, there's not a distinction between traditional and conservative. They are, in their mind, and Reform. There's no distinction. It's just, if it's not Orthodox, then it is not, it is on the other side of this divide. When it comes to, again, this issue of theological debate and discussion and validity and stuff. So somehow it came to the attention of somebody who brought it to the attention of somebody who brought it to the attention of somebody. And before you knew it, the greatest rabbinic scholar in the world, and he's been the greatest rabbinic scholar in the world for the past few decades, was prepared to write a letter mentioning that I was doing this and that it was a breach in the wall of a decades-long principled distinction that was being made between Orthodox community and conservative Reform communities, and that this was a breach that should not be tolerated. Now the consequences of a letter like that from that rabbi were explained to me as my children would not find wives. My children would not be able to go to the schools that they wanted to go to. And initially, the breath was taken out of me. Now, I believed in what I was doing tremendously, but somehow what I was doing became an international issue. And this, obviously, I wasn't the only one doing it. Many people were involved in this, but for some reason this was going to be the test, you know, the case that was going to be mentioned. I was no different than anybody. I wasn't doing something different than anybody else. But at the time, the question became, would I continue teaching in the synagogue during that time while this was going on? Now, it eventually got resolved, and the resolution was that rabbis from here had to fly to Israel. There was a tremendous amount of negotiating going on. This was something much bigger than I could have done on my own. It involved rabbis from the Kollel and Rabbi First and many other rabbis who were prominent, very prominent rabbis here, flying to all around the world to fix something because they believed it was a necessary thing to do, not just because they were trying to save my career. But during that time, I decided I was not going to teach classes. There was a brief period of time, but I decided I was not going to be able to teach classes in the synagogue while this was going on because it just got too big. It just got way too big. Now there are two kids who I think of every day. These kids I was teaching a class of kids at that time, and many of these kids I still have a relationship with, and I plan on having a relationship with for the rest of my life. But there are two kids in particular who I know I lost a connection to by not being able to go through with this, and I think about that all the time because for me those kind of things matter. But and eventually it got resolved, and the resolution was that this is something that is forbidden, except on a case-by-case basis if there is a demonstration that there would be benefit to the Jewish people at large for doing this kind of thing, that it could be permitted, which meant that everything pretty much went back to the way it was wrong. And that and it was more a matter of getting too much attention called to something that perhaps needed to function more in the shadows. I understand the need, and I do understand the need, and it took me a long time afterwards because this was an intense thing for me to go through. But I understand the need for people to be minding the boundaries. You need police. You need, in order for society to function smoothly, you need a sense of order, and a sense of order means that there are agreements. There are agreements about what's accepted in the community and not. They weren't telling me, nobody was telling me that I was going to go to hell. They were just telling me that we don't want you in our community. And they have a right, people have a right to decide who's going to be in their community and who's not going to be a part of their community if they feel that way. And I understand the need for a clear sense of where boundaries are. Good fences make good neighbors. I understand that there needs to be that. And I also understand that I'm in a chosen profession that challenges the boundary on a regular basis, and because of that it's a hazard of what I do, that I could be legitimately, I could have been crossing a line that should not have been crossed, or if it did get called to everybody's attention, it could be creating some kind of a breach that was an issue, and they may have been right about that. But I want you to understand the impact of that. I went to rabbinic convention after that. Nobody wanted to sit next to me. These guys were all doing the same thing. They did not want to sit next to me. They're not going to go and be, when people came to do programs with me to this day, when rabbis from West Riders Park come to do programs with me, they call Rabbi first to see if they can do a program with me, or is this going to affect their reputation. Now he tells them always, you must do a program with him, and it's never been different, and I've gotten the support of all the important figures. But if you're talking about why somebody might not want to be, what I meant when I said that an Orthodox, there might be an issue if an Orthodox rabbi is on a panel, that's what I would, that was what I was talking about. Again, I'm not saying these issues are not weighty. The issues that are involved in the difference between conservative and Reform and Orthodox Judaism are serious issues. They are small issues compared to the need that we have as people to share with each other and build with each other and grow with each other. And in the continuing discussion, I hope that this leads to more of that.